Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're in the world. Welcome to Next Planet Live. My name is Lionel Miranda, and today we are going to talk about Kruleboyz. We're going to dive into the shallows and see where the faction's at. Now, we did a previous video on Ironjaws, and that will be linked below that you can go check out. The quick summary is, I'm not a fan of the book, but it is the situation that we find ourselves in. So what do we do? Do we cry in the corner? Do we just give up on everything? Yeah, maybe we change factions. But for those of you that absolutely love the faction, well, I'm here to provide you with maybe some ideas and maybe some insights on what you can possibly do. Now, I've been messing around with it post-book, and it's a bit rough. The faction lost a lot of really interesting play. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. The Kruleboyz were positioned roughly 50-48% win rates. So they weren't really dominating the meta, but they had some really strong mechanics that worked at least 50% of the time. But that's now changed enormously. So without further ado, let's go into where we're at. All right. First off, I want to thank my Gaio. He's on the wheels of steel in the back room right now. And Gaio, my friend, we're going to go with slide number uno. And that's going to be talking about Honor Guard. Now, we can't dive into the actual book or Kruleboyz without touching upon this first. Because these have big effects on the faction, or at least potentially. The first one we're going to start off with is with Field Marshal. Now, Field Marshal is just absolutely amazing. You pick a hero that's nested under your general, and that hero gets the basically Honor Guard ability of Field Marshal. So holding within 12 of that Field Marshal, infantry units get an extra 2 inches to their move. Now, there's several ways we could really leverage this. Obviously, having our orcs just be faster is great, but being able to potentially close in with our Boltboyz is actually quite nice because our threat range of our bolts actually increased by 2 inches. That's nice. It's not going to break the universe, but it is super nice. Because unlike Ironjaws, Kruleboyz at least have the ability to reach across the table with their range attacks, and that is a big difference. It's one of the reasons why they were technically better than Ironjaws, because they had the ability to reach out and touch someone. All right, so that was Field Marshal. The next one we're going to talk about is Prized Beast. Now, you would think we would leverage this in a big way, but it's a bit hit or miss. Our beasts are okay, with the exception of one, in my opinion, sorry. And we'll get to it when we get to it. But prize beasts are not the Maw-gruntas that the Ironjaws have. The big giant pigs, I think, really leverage it quite well, or at least have a great option to leverage. Where weirdly, Kruleboyz, although they have a few options for monsters, most of them are pretty mediocre. Again, exception one. But we'll talk about that in the next little bit. All right. I believe our next, here, let me reference, because this is a comprehensive video. We're gonna get into battle traits and specifically dirty tricks. Now, dirty tricks is the reason to start Kruleboyz. They are super, super cool. Oh man, dirty tricks. The fact you could teleport before at the end of a move was just absolutely tremendous, but that has now changed. So what do I mean by that? Well, the sneaky sneaking specifically is what I'm talking about. And sneaky sneaking has changed dramatically. It is now in your hero phase. So let me just get everything up on screen for myself. So the way, before we dive into the details, the way dirty tricks work is you announce that you're going to perform a dirty trick, and then you roll a die. The first time you do it, it happens on a 2+. The second time you perform a dirty trick in that turn, it now happens on a 3+. And the third time it happens on a 4+, topping off at 5+. And that's for the round of the game. So if your opponent goes first, you could pull off some dirty tricks on his turn. First time you do it is 2, second time you do it is 3, and then it clicks over to your side, and then you go, well, now you perform a dirty trick. Well, now it's the third time, and it happens on a 4, and so forth. And then it resets back to 2+ at the beginning of the rounds. All right, so what are the things you could do? Well, one of the things you could do is Lethal Surprise. I thought it was a bad D3, but it's actually a good one. It's just a straight up D3 mortal wounds to a unit. And this is actually quite cool. It happens in any charge phase. You do D3 mortal wounds, and then if that unit unlocks extra damage when they charge, they do not do so. This is actually one of the go-to dirty tricks that you will probably perform in game. There's lots of extra damage on knights. It's one of the reasons why cavalry is so prevalent in the meta. So this dirty trick is just absolutely fantastic. Another one you could do is any combat phase, you could do Noisy Racket. Now, Noisy Racket, speaking of powerful, is basically on the dirty trick roll, assuming it's successful, gives that unit or the enemy unit strike last. Now, strike last is absolutely tremendous. Obviously, he won't go until you do, but it's more than that. You'll be able to dogpile that unit if he charged into many units. You'll get an opportunity to basically kick him while he's down, as he's grasping his ears, I guess, due to all the Noisy Racket. The other dirty tricks you got happen in the hero phase, and that's where things kind of get sad, and that's Sneaky Sneaking. Sneaky Sneaking is a teleport, which is amazing. I am not, no doubt about it. Teleporting a unit is fantastic. Now, you can't teleport everything. It has to be something with 10 or fewer models. So you can't take a big unit of 20 Gutrippaz and just teleport it across the table. That can't happen. But you could take Monster-killaz, you could take Boltboyz, you could take a min unit of Gutrippaz. These, I don't believe, could be any monsters either. Yeah, it has to be an infantry unit. It can't be any of the monsters or anything like that. But obviously, very, very effective. Now, what made it sad is it's no longer at the end of any movement phase. So what it was before is you had your opponent declare your battle tactic, and then if that battle tactic involved charging or killing one of your units, you can go peace out, teleport across the table, and then deny him the battle tactic. Now, I wouldn't say this is an unfair treatment of Sneaky Sneakin'. A lot of those effects have moved to the hero phase. So I guess this now is now in the hero phase. Wouldn't be, how would you say, terrible, but oh my gosh, was it absolutely amazing before, and it wasn't breaking the universe. Like, it's not like Kruleboyz were, because of this, were just dominating the meta. And if there was ever a faction I thought would maybe get an exception, it would have been our shifty cousins in the Kruleboyz. Not happy with the fact that it got shifted, but I do understand why, I guess. The big issue, though, is now that it's in the same phase as venom-encrusted weapons, and you go, what's venom-encrusted weapons? Well, basically, it's a dirty trick where the boys take out their poison toads and cover their weapons in poison sauce. And basically what that means, it turns their crit mortals, because pretty much all Kruleboyz have the ability to inflict a mortal on a crit hit. It now crits on 5s. Potent ability. But now that they're both Sneaky Sneakin' and Venom Encrusted are actually in the same phase, you cannot perform a dirty trick in the same phase. You can only perform one. right? Can't perform 2, can't perform multiple dirty tricks in the same phase. So you're gonna have to pick between Venom Encrusted or Sneaky Sneakin', whereas before, each dirty trick had a different phase, so there was no overlap. Now there is, and here's now where the real big nerf happens, is now you're gonna have to like choose between either or. I would have loved it if they just moved Venom Encrusted weapons to a different phase. Just end of movement, I don't know. Does it make sense? Sure, why not? Why not at the end of movement, you pick a unit and they just take an opportunity to just smudge their weapons in Poison Toad. I do not like the fact that we now have to choose between the two. Even though both are powerful, it's okay for a rule to be powerful, and just like it is for everyone else. I don't understand why we have to be hampered and pinned in our choices, where everyone else's powerful abilities get to blossom and do whatever they wish. It's a real shame that the two conflict, but that is the situation we're in. Okay, so let's kind of dive into some of the positive stuff. I think we've ripped through the traits. Yeah, we've ripped through the traits. All right, let's go to the Scare Gob Totem. All right, so the Scare Gob Totem, I think is actually pretty cool. Here's its stats. It's 12 wounds with a 4+ save. Gaio, if you go over to the next still, we'll go actually dive into the rules, which is the Sinister Stare. Now, the Sinister Stare is kind of cool. It's once per turn, your hero phase. You declare, or you pick a visible enemy unit or friendly Kruleboyz unit wholly within 12 of this terrain feature to be the target. If this unit has a hero in it, that range increases to 18. I hate the fact that the enemy has to be wholly within 18 or wholly within 12. It's very easy for them to kind of poke out and just basically not be affected by this. But the important thing is you can engineer this pretty well with your own units. So what does that mean? Well, here, let's get down to the effect. Until the start of the next turn, the unit that's picked gets +1 to the dirty trick roll. This is very powerful. Now, you're going to have to call it ahead of time. So meaning it's your hero phase, your stuff is all on the table. If you're planning to move to engage later or planning to do something else, you're going to have to call the shot, so to speak. Or if you don't have priority, you don't know where your opponent's going to go, again, you're going to have to call the shot, going to call this roll, call the buff. But +1 to that die roll can make that roll automatic. And that is very strong. Now, some people were wondering whether this needed a clarification. It shouldn't. There are rules that exist currently right now that add to die rolls that effectively make things automatic. I can't see why this would be any different. If they were to clarify it, it would be to just nerf it. The language is the same as the others, so it would be automatic. So this could be very, very powerful. If you're wholly within 18 inches of the tower and you've jammed a unit in front of your opponent, you can give them the +1 to the dirty trick roll, and then when they charge in, you can force them to strike last automatically. Or another thing you can do is position 2 units up front and pick one of them for sure. And if the opponent slams 1 unit, allow that unit to perform the dirty trick on a 2+. Let's say the one that does D3 mortals and deprive +1 charge damage. And then if the other one's engaged by another unit, that would get the +1 as well. But instead of automatic, because you've already used one, it also happens on a 2+. So you can engineer 2 dirty tricks happening on 2s. That's not bad. That's almost like quasi-exciting. I mean, there's a little bit of hoops you gotta jump through, but it's not enormously hard to be wholly within 18 inches of the tower. You can engineer it. It will limit movement, though, to get that bonus. But generally speaking, Kruleboyz like castling, and then having the Boltboyz in the back or what have you. And I think that's going to be a play style that is going to be what defines the faction. It doesn't really have a lot of play beyond the castling. Like I said, you can still dive into sneak in a little bit later in latter turns of the game when your opponent has to commit more troops to the front. And then maybe you could sneak at the cost of damage, of course, because now there's an opportunity cost of Venom Encrusted. You can sneak onto their objectives, potentially, if they leave it undefended. Like I said, Teleport is a very, very strong ability. And then having it potentially automatic at the start of a round is really quite good. So, am I a fan of the terrain? I am a fan of the terrain. If you haven't built the actual terrain piece itself, it is actually a very, very fun model to paint. And to build, for that matter. Okay, so there's the Scare Gob. I'm going to try and make this not a super long video. Let's just rip through Kragnos, the man, the legend, the orange donkey. If you don't know how I feel about Kragnos, well, you can watch a video. We'll post another link at the bottom where I talk about my favorite orange donkey. We're going to focus on the rules. So let's get his stats up. What does Kragnos do for Kruleboyz? Typically, the big emphasis of Kragnos is his additional die to charge so that your troops can charge 3d6 inches while wholly within 12 of the donkey. Now, I'm not saying that that's not good in Kruleboyz, but the big actual thing that he brings to the table is the fact that he is a monster in combat. The one thing that Kruleboyz don't have a lot of is things that can just point and click and delete. I mean, their shots from the Boltboyz are good and all, but resolving things in combat, typically in AOS, is usually where it's at. That's usually where the mass amounts of damage get done. And Kragnos is no exception. Like, if you look at his stats, that Dread Mace at 6 attacks, 3s, 2s, 3 ran 4 flat damage is absolutely no joke. That guy stares at a thing and just smashes it into the ground. He also has a fun rule, if we go to the next slide, Guile, called Rampaging Destruction. And Rampaging Destruction, he picks 1 or 2 effects. He either does the crappy D3 mortal, so on a 2+. There, let me just read it, just make sure I'm reading it right. If this unit charges this phase, pick 1 of the following effects. Roll a dice for each enemy unit within 1 inch. On a 2+, inflict the amount of mortal damage on that unit equal to the roll. I am completely wrong. It's not the crappy D3, it's actually a D6. So you, my goodness, only have a 17% chance of failing this. It doesn't get any better, folks. So if you roll a 2, you do 2 mortal wounds. If you roll a 5, you do 5 mortal wounds. Just don't roll 1s, and you always do mortal wounds. Its second effect is actually where it gets kind of, well, really cool. It's when he charges a monster. And when he charges a monster, he actually rolls 2d6. Now, as long as that result isn't 7, so total 7, he takes the dice and they multiply each other. So what does that mean? It means if you roll, let's just say you roll a 5 and a 2, 5 times 2 is 10. You do 10 mortal wounds to the monster. And that sounds pretty damn wicked. Most monsters are floating in and around 12 to 14 wounds. There are, of course, exceptions. But generally speaking, just on a charge, Kragnos is an absolute beast. And that's truly what he brings to the table for Kruleboyz. Why does the 3d6 charge not seem to be, why am I saying it's not as big a deal? It's just simply because Kruleboyz really don't have units that mix it up very well, barring one singular monster in the form of a Mirebrute, which we'll get to. The Sludge Raker isn't what it was in 3rd edition. I think it's rather limp-wristed and just something you can't count on. The Mashcrawler is okay. Dobby's not bad, but he's really not meant really to mix it up. Although he's decent, he's not something that I would be tremendously excited for and design around Kragnos. So maybe you take a whole bunch of Mirebrutes and with Kragnos and you just like stomp across the field. But more than likely, what you will do is build a castle army and use Kragnos as something to sally forth from that castle to smash things. And he does that very, very well. And having a guy that does that very well, charging 3d6, because he obviously sees himself, is not bad. The other really cool thing about Kragnos is he does count as a Kruleboyz unit. So if you sally outside the castle, he can still perform a dirty trick himself. So if something attacks him and charges him, and you hadn't used the dirty trick yet, you could actually perform strike last on a 2+. Better yet, if he's out and it's the start of the round and he's out and exposed but wholly within 18 inches of the tower, you could say he gets the +1 to die roll, and then anyone that comes at them he will automatically strike last. Now that's kind of exciting. So, best Kruleboy ever is the Orange Donkey. TLDR, he's the best destruction whatever in any faction he's in, which is what makes him so bad. Not because he's not great, it's just because he's so necessary in a lot of destruction lists. Still, really cool that he gets to use the actual dirty tricks himself. All right, so I failed at going quickly. Let's just embrace it. Next one, Gobsprakk. All right, so Gobsprakk is a 2-level wizard. You could keep it on the first slide there, Gaio. And think of him as a wizard, so bad at combat, with 14 wounds and a 5+ save. And that's pretty much it. I'm not saying the bird doesn't do anything. What I'm saying is you are not taking him because of the bird, because he's some sort of melee monster. The bird at best is a plan B, most likely a plan C, to maybe take the last remaining wounds off something that's already been weakened and now you're getting desperate and you just want it to die. Then maybe Gobsprakk can be sent in. His stats on his attacks with the Bogbark staff is probably his best attack. No, I guess the Killabeak Stinger isn't bad. It's all just meh. The problem is that most of it hits on 4s. So you're not really taking him for that. He does have a ward of 6+ though with those 14 wounds. So that's something. But it's his abilities are where it's at. So let's get down to his abilities. Mork says no. Mork says no is each time a unit unbinds, each time this unit, so him, unbinds a spell, and that unbinding roll. Oh, sorry, pardon me. How about I just read it? Okay, here we go. Mork says no. Each time this unit unbinds a spell, inflict D3 mortal wounds on the caster. If the unbinding check or roll was 10 or more, inflict D6 mortal wounds on the caster. That's pretty cool. And combines really well with his next little thing, which is the Screaming Mandrak, or Mandark? No, Mandrak, I said it right the first time. And Mandrak has a once per game ability where he could dispel a spell instead of on a 2 dice, he could do it with 3 dice. Average on 3 dice is 11.5, so 10 or 11, 10.5, which is either 10 or 11, because dice don't know fractions. You get to basically do D6 mortal wounds to a wizard on average dice. That ain't bad. So where he shines is basically with his spells. Now we're going to dive into spells in a little bit when we get to the shaman, the other exciting bit. So we're going to keep him in mind. Now he's not cheap. If I remember correctly, he's like 330 points of Wizard Vulture. Certainly not. Here, let me get it in the right. Where did I go? Oh my goodness. I backed out entirely. Hero. There we go. Gobsprakk, yeah, 330 points. Certainly not cheap. But the big deal about Gobsprakk isn't just the fact that he's a wizard and everything else. And I'll mention Kragnos again in this section. It's the fact that he's a War Master. So both Kragnos and Gobsprakk have the ability, and the only two models in Kruleboyz that have the ability to nest another monster within their regiment. So Gobsprakk can lead that regiment, and you can nest a Sludge Raker. You can nest a Mirebrute. You can nest a Marsh Crawler Sloggoth. And then take advantage of the Honor Guard, which is Prize Beast. Where the magic sauce happens, again, is with the Mirebrute, but that's pretty much the real reason you would take Gobsprakk. Or I should say one of two reasons. One is he's a 2-level wizard, and the other reason is that you could potentially leverage the Prize Beast. And that is super, super cool. Again, he's the only Kruleboy, only in-house, minus the Orange Donkey, that can do that. No other hero in Kruleboyz, other than those two, can do that. All right, so let's get to the next one, which we got the Swampcalla Shaman. Now, the Swampcalla Shaman is amazing. So this guy's got a native +1 to cast. Obviously, he's nothing to write home about regarding his melee stats. He does some stuff in melee. But the big deal is his casting. First, we'll go off with Foul Elixirs, though. So Foul Elixirs, he actually got an improvement. This is one of the very few improvements that the War Clans book provided the army. And I think it's pretty awesome. This trick used to work only on a 3+, and now it works on a 2+. So roll a die on a 2+, add 1 to the save rolls to the target unit for the rest of the turn. Now this only lasts until end of turn. It doesn't last until next hero phase, which is terrible. But I guess when you live in the ghetto, folks, you gotta help. You gotta take what help you can get. And on a roll of 1, you take D3 mortal wounds. The wizard would take D3 mortal wounds. Now he has to pick a Kruleboy infantry and wholly within 12 to do that. But you can actually start save stacking. That's not bad. That's not bad. So it's the only issue I have with this, and it's a big one, is it says your hero phase. I truly, truly wish this just said hero phase. It would just make them so good and not broken. It'd be as good as any other powerful thing in any other army. And the fact you would have to die roll it for every single time you try to use it, I think is a perfectly balanced way to do it. Foul Elixir is an improvement. I just wish you could do it on your opponent's turn so that you could save stack potentially on your opponent's turn in an army that's relatively fragile. So let's go over to where the real magic happens, and that's on his Hobgrot. And as long as that Hobgrot token is kicking around, he gets +1 to cast. Now this is very exciting. It's very exciting because when combined with the manifestations, which we're about to talk to in a second, this could be one of the strongest wizards in the game. So he has a natural +1 to cast. And if he pulls off the Aurora, he gets a +2. He could be +3 to cast, folks. +3. That's pretty amazing. That is absolutely pretty amazing. I absolutely love the Shaman. The only downside, he is a 1-cast wizard. Now, you can engineer it by giving him an artifact, which will give him an additional cast. But the opportunity cost there will be Mork's Eye Pebble. Now, the staff providing +1 or 1 extra cast, 1 extra power level is amazing, and it would seem like it would be the logical choice. But Mork's Eye Pebble, I gotta tell you, I've been leaning on that quite a lot, especially since I've been rocking out bone ripper, sure say, gut rippers. The gut rippers with a 5-up save really allows that castle wall to hold for as long as possible. And that's why I just love the Mork's Eye Pebble. But unfortunately, you cannot have both. You are going to have to make that choice in your list design. And you're either going to have to go for the defensive Mork's Eye Pebble or the wonderful casting of, well, the extra cast off of Wizard that has a bonus to cast. Now, let's go back again. Gobsprakk, which amazing, is a 2-cast wizard, but no bonuses, whereas the Shaman is a 1-cast wizard with 1 bonus. Both are good. You're going to find the Swampcalla Shaman is going to probably make it into multiple lists. I've been running 2 myself. He's just so good. I get 1 to cast. You know what? Let's get into the manifestations. I keep on talking about it. Let's talk about it right now. We're going to lead off with the Gork Aurora. And if you haven't seen my Iron Jaws video, let me tell you, this is by far one of my absolute favorite manifestations, which leads into my other most favorite manifestation. We'll talk about it in a sec. But the Aurora is amazing. Now it's just got it releases a toxic gas, 5 attacks, hitting on 2+, wounding on a 4+, with a rend and D3 mortal wounds. That's really not why you're taking him. Why you're taking him is because of the Bellowing Wah. And the Bellowing Wah, you pick 1 or 2 to your casting roll, okay? 1 or 2. And then if you pick 1, you roll a die. If you pick 2, you roll 2 die. And if you roll a 1 or 2 on either one of those dice, you allocate 1 damage to the Shaman. At the beginning of the game, I'm pretty much always going for the 2+2 to cast. And this is where the regular Swampcalla Shaman can get up to +3 to cast. +3. And if you're going down that route, you might want to love that extra staff, because right after he casts this Aurora, which by the way is only cast on a 5+. So the Swampcalla only needs a 4 or more to get this out. Once this is out, then the magic really happens. Let's go into the Foot of Gork. Yeah, that's right, Foot of Gork. Cast normally on a 6+, but at +3 to cast, you're doing this on a 3+, and you basically get to place these things on the field, and then these things start moving around. And I say these things because they're actually a manifestation that is 2 parts. And the 2 parts move like a slinky. You don't get to move both. You get to move 1. So you get to move 1 forward or move 1 back. Where they place, you pick every enemy unit within 3 of the foot. Each of those enemy units suffer D3 damage. Again, it's not the bad D3. So even if you roll a 1 or a 2 on a D3, you still inflict damage. The units gain the stomp keyword until your next turn. Now that's where things get really, really important, and adds to the whole control module of what orcs are. And Kruleboyz are loving it. They want to disrupt, and they absolutely adore this spell. Because why? Because while units have the stomp keyword until your next turn, they roll 1 less dice when they charge. That is absolutely huge. Basically, on just a 2 redeploy, when they move close to you and stop outside of 3 because they have to, as long as you throw a 2 redeploy, just move 2 inches back, they now have to roll a 5 or a 6 to complete a charge. And that is absolutely amazing. If your opponent misplays or mispositions, and you could get that foot to clip 2, maybe even 3 units, let's say it's a monster with 2 units beside it, if you could stomp all of them, you are going into that next priority roll cool as a cucumber. If you could prevent them or get them to only be able to charge 1d6, you could actually conceivably just, You win priority, pass it. Just absolutely incredible. Love Foot of Gork. I struggle to figure out what other manifestation I would pick. I think in this orc army, which I think are probably the best wizards, so the most wizardy of orc armies of the two, I think I'd always pick their in-house manifestation. Absolutely fantastic job on the design team's part. It's exciting. The manifestations look cool. What more do you want? All right, so this manifestation lore does have 3 manifestations in it. So let's go to the next one. The Mork Spit Marsh. And it has no attacks, but it does have some effects. And one of the effects is the Grasping Gunge. And basically, units cannot run. If they start running within 6 inches of this manifestation, the manifestation is pretty large, it's roughly above that big, they cannot run. Again, more control elements in an army that loves doing control and buying time. Why? I'm going to tell you why. Boltboyz. Those are the things you're going to be leaning on pretty heavy, and any extra time you could squeeze out of a round and slow down your opponent is a wonderful thing. The other thing that the Mork Spit Marsh does do is it subtracts 3 from control scores for enemy units within 6 inches of it. Okay, so manifestation lore, big thumbs up. Yeah, like I said, I can't think of why you'd want to pick a different manifestation lore. It's so lovely. The Aurora just unlocks the entire faction. Now, we just talked about the manifestation lore. I think it leads really well into the Kruleboyz lore spells in general. So for instance, once you can get Aurora out, if you have a second cast, you can cast Choking Mist. Now, Choking Mist is normally cast on a 7, but if you're rocking out at a +3 to cast, you now only need a 4+ to do this. And you pick an enemy unit pick a visible enemy unit wholly within 12 inches of them, so of the wizard, and then make a casting roll. Subtract 1 from the attacks characteristic of the enemy unit's weapons. That is absolutely, again, even more control. So once an enemy commits, you can cast on the enemy turn at -1 to cast, but you would still be at a +2 to cast on enemy turn and just start stripping attacks from that unit that engage, say, your Gutrippaz that are trying to hold and keep the enemy at bay. Choking Mist is absolutely fantastic for that. Then we got the Black Pit. This is cast on a 5+. This is okay. It's a damage spell. I'm not saying that I hate it. It's more the fact that it's just unremarkable. You roll a die for every model in the unit, and on a 6 you inflict a mortal wound. Not terrible. Obviously works really well against units, not so hot against individual monsters or heroes. Then we get into Mork's Cunning, and this is also kind of exciting because this is a spell where you pick one of your friendly units, infantry. It is infantry, right? No, it's a Kruleboyz unit. So it's any Kruleboyz unit, and as long as they're wholly within 12, assuming you get it off, it's cast on a 6. So again, if you're rocking +3 to cast, all you need is a 3 to do this. Or on an enemy turn, only need a 4 to cast this. That unit gets +1 to their save until the start of your next turn. So you can layer these buffs, layer the debuffs, and welcome to Apex Control Army, which is what I think Kruleboyz and the direction that the design team wanted to go. I love control. Again, here's a little magic injection. I myself am an aggro control player. Love aggression or aggressive armies that do lots of damage, and I love being able to dictate how my opponent plays the game. You can do that in lots of ways, but the Kruleboyz toolbox is nice and deep, and you can really mess up an opponent's action plans on their turn. And that's exciting. It genuinely is exciting. So, hope, folks. So if you want to stick with Kruleboyz, I think leaning into the wizards is a fantastic option because we got some absolutely phenomenal wizards. All right, so let's see what's next. We got Swampcalla Shaman we just did. We get into Killaboss on Vulcha. All right, Killaboss on Vulcha. Why do you want to take the Killaboss on Vulcha? I gotta tell you, I am not super enthusiastic about this guy. He's okay. His melee stats are fine. Here's why you'd want to take the Killaboss on Corpse-rippa Vulcha. I like the fact that, well, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of it. He's got a commanding view. And what does that mean? It basically is, if you issue a redeploy around him, so wholly within 12 inches of him, you always get a minimum redeploy of 4. So even if you roll a 1 or to 3, it automatically becomes a 4. Okay, now that's cool, but let's connect dots a little bit. If you hit the other guy with the Foot of Gork, and now that unit is only rolling 1 die to charge, a minimum redeploy of 4 means it can no longer charge that unit. And that's where the Corpse-rippa Vulcha kind of fits in place. Now, he is good for that reason, and that reason primarily. It's just whether or not you can fit him points-wise. It's a cool little bit of tech. I also like him. He's also got another ability called Vulcha Dive. The Vulcha Dive is if this unit charged this phase, pick an enemy unit in combat with it to be the target. Okay, so the effect, roll a number of dice equal to the unmodified die roll, and on a 4+, do a mortal wound. Now, this trick has been, been going since the index was released, and the trick is to take Slippery Scumbag. Slippery Scumbag is a command trait or heroic trait, and what it allows you to do is at the beginning of combat, so combat abilities would trigger, your opponent would trigger all their combat abilities, and then you would have yours. On a 3+, you can leave combat. You just move and leave combat. Really, really good. So now, check this out. Your turn. You charge, inflict mortal wounds with the Vulcha Dive, enter combat phase, 3+, leave. Now clicks over to your opponent. Your opponent would charge the Vulcha. In the combat phase, 3+, leave again. And now it becomes a very, very annoying and really cool. I love the model. Really cool looking model. And a really neat ability. Again, it's how much value you have or attribute to this is your choice. It's on how you design your list. He definitely has some play. I like his commanding view and how it kind of synergizes with the foot. His overall damage is okay. If you put him underneath Gobsprakk, and I believe you could do this, you can make him your prize beast, which does bump up his combat abilities, and now he's hitting on a 3+, wounding on a 3+, with 2 damages. Most of his stats then turn into 3s, which isn't bad. It's not like he's terrible. He is definitely the kind of guy, though, that you wouldn't send in to delete a thing. You would send him in to finish off a thing. Something that's already been weakened in previous rounds. He is not Kragnos. That is for sure. Kragnos, you can actually maneuver right into combat to actually smash the thing into the ground, and Kragnos will delete. This guy's not this guy's job. He's a little bit more techie and more of a mop-up role. All right, so that's the Killaboss on Corpse-rippa Vulcha. Then we get into the Killaboss on the Gnashtoof, one of the coolest looking models. Absolutely adore this model, and one of the models that no one ever took because he was terrible. So what purpose does he serve in Kruleboyz now? Well, from a melee stats perspective, I'm sure Guyo has it on the screen right now, he's got a decent amount of attacks, 10 attacks coming from his profile. The problem is all of them hit on 4s. He used to hit on 3s. He's one of the very few Orc War Scrolls that hit on 3s, but they decided to take that away. Why? Conspiracy, folks. That's what. That's why. Conspiracy. Anyway, cool thing is about him, he's one of the toughest models, or toughest Kruleboyz models in the army. With an armor save of 3+, that is pretty awesome. So he can actually jam into some light units. He'll definitely bully units on the sides of tables that are there to take battle tactics. He can't really dive into any hammers or anything like that. But he is actually good at performing battle tactics as well, because he does move 10 inches. So he's pretty quick. So why would you take him? Well, he's also the cheapest hero that allows you to nest a small hero. Not a monster, but a small hero. What is referred to as, I believe, a swamp boss or a swamp. I can't remember what it's called. I'll dive into it a little bit later, but you can take one of your small heroes and nest it underneath them. Now, why is that important? To unlock Field Marshal, you need a hero that is within a regiment, and he is the cheapest way to do that. So for that purposes, you can make the Killaboss your general, and then stick another Killaboss on foot underneath him. Or you could take the Belcha-banna and put it underneath him. And that's pretty cool. So if you're not looking at unlocking prized beasts in your overall army plan, this guy actually is pretty good as a general, fast mobile general that unlocks Field Marshal, or I should say Field Sergeant. So other than that, he does a few other little cutesy things, all part of the plan, which is add 3 to the target's control score until the start of the next turn, and that's picking a Kruleboyz unit wholly within 9 inches of himself. Then he has another passive ability that while he's on an objective, contesting that objective, he can add 1 to the hit rolls of Kruleboyz units wholly within 12 inches of him. Not hard to engineer with a movement of 10. So if you have Gutrippaz that are rushing an objective, you can just get him to clip that objective, and now you don't have to spend any CP to have those Kruleboyz get a +1 to hit. Okay, not bad. The important thing is the Field Sergeant, I think, and having your orcs getting that extra +2 inches is really quite cool, because now you can have Gutrippaz moving 7 inches upfield. You can have Boltboyz moving 7 inches behind them and laying down bolt fire. I think that's where he becomes the most useful. All right, now we'll go into probably one of my absolute favorites, is the Breaka-boss. Now, I didn't really like him before because he was relatively slow. Guess what? Still is. But where he really becomes quite cool is in his ability to become a prized beast. So if you take a Gobsprakk or you take a Kragnos, you can nest this guy underneath them, and he will then unlock +1 to hit for the rider, and most importantly, for the companion attacks. So let's dive into his actual war scroll. He moves 5 inches. He is slow, molasses slow, but he has a decent amount of wounds at 12. a decent armor save at 4+. The big deal, or we're about to get to the big deal, is the Mirebrute's clubs. Those are companion attacks that 4 of them that hit on 4s, wound on 2s, wonderfully 2 rend with 3 flat damage. Now, that sounds pretty darn good. What if I told you there was a way to get even more of those attacks? And that is from his ability called the Breaka-harness. Basically, the rider yanks really hard on the chain and inflicts D3 mortal wounds to the actual troll itself. And for every mortal wound, he gets 2 additional attacks off those Mirebrute clubs. That's pretty sweet. I played a game, did 3 mortal wounds, unlocked an additional 6 attacks. An additional 6 attacks to the actual clubs, jacking up those total amount of attacks to 10. If you make him a prize beast, he could be hitting on 3s, wounding on 2s, 2 up on that rend, -2 on the rend with 3 flat damage. That is pretty darn exciting. So you could take him as a prize beast, again, under Kragnos or under Gobsprakk, but only those 2. The Corpse-rippa Vulcha does not unlock putting monsters underneath it, unfortunately. That would have been a nice alternative as a little bit less expensive choice, because it is a bit cheaper than Gobsprakk. That would have been pretty cool, but unfortunately not the case. But Breaka-boss, a phenomenal prize beast. The other thing I like about him, if you're not planning on unlocking the prize beast, and it's not something you're interested in, he actually makes a pretty great general himself. Why? Because as a general, he can then nest another one of those small heroes, so you could unlock Field Sergeant. So he's another way to unlock Field Sergeant, but a more expensive choice than the Gnashtoof. So that would be the downside, but a way more aggressive choice as a general. Now, again, Kruleboyz typically have a tendency to castle, so your opponent typically, again, has the ability, or will most likely be coming at you. If I was to take him as my general, I would be giving him Egomaniac, and basically, he would have a 4-up ward, and then for every 4+, he shunts the damage over to the Gutrippaz, just to increase his survivability, because he's going to be jamming up there relatively, well, most of the time. I would want to do that anyway. So that you want him to be roughly within 3 inches of your front line, so that if an enemy engages, he will engage that troll. If the enemy is aware of that, then he'll try to avoid that troll, and that could potentially detract from attacks. So even by avoiding him, he serves a purpose. Then you pop the Mork's Eye Pebble. Everyone gets a 5+ ward, and those 5+ wards can be dead handy, because it can give him a 5+ ward. But more importantly, all the Gutrippaz can have a 5-up ward, and now they act as a catcher's mitt to the fastball special that is the Breaka-boss that you're going to send in to hopefully do some work. So Breaka-boss, big fan of the Breaka-boss. He's one of the few War Scrolls in the army, barring Kragnos, that actually could do some work in combat. All right, next War Scroll. Let's get down to one of my absolute favorite Field Sergeants, which is the Murknob. Now, the Murknob was definitely a thing no one ever took. Super cool model. It's just, why would you spend points on this thing? Well, the fact that he can now get Field Marshal as an Honor Guard ability, he actually makes a really neat little point to drop that big 12-inch bubble of +2 move to the infantry. What's also super cool about the actual Murknob is his banner. And the banner has 2 abilities. I don't know which one was first. Guy, you're going to have to kind of like filter it out, but I believe his Breath of the Mire Drakes is one of his first abilities. Is if he's in combat range with an enemy, on a roll of a 2 2 to 5, he does 1 mortal wound to that unit. On a roll of a 6, he does D3 mortal wounds to that enemy unit. That's okay. That's not really the reason to take him, though. The reason is Field Marshal and this next ability, and that's his passive ability of Power of Kragnos, which is friendly Kruleboyz units, not just infantry, but Kruleboyz units, get a ward save of 6+. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but if you take or ever have plans of taking 40 Gutrippas, that's 80 wounds of meat. And 80 wounds of meat that in the latter turns, once you burn through your Mork's Pebble, getting a 6-up ward is actually pretty handy. I like him quite a bit. I like the fact that I have a reason to take him. It's a sweet looking model that can really lend itself to a really cool paint job as well. So yeah, makes an amazing field sergeant. I recommend him. All right, next choice, we got the Killaboss with Stab-grot. This is your other option as your field sergeant. I'm not saying I would never take him, but he's not terribly exciting. Most of these field sergeants I want to keep out of combat to hold on to that ability for as long as I can. And this guy's sure he's got a combat ability, but the combat ability again is just okay. 5 attacks, hitting on 4s, wounding on 3s, 1 rend, and then 2 damage is very, very middling at best. He's got a Stab-grot that could do some other stuff. Who cares? But probably his coolest ability, and I guess the reason to take him as your field sergeant, would be the ability called Keep Him in Line. Now, the effect is, if this unit is wholly within 12 inches of the unit using all-out attack command, that unit also gets a +1 to wound. All right, so you're sending your Gutrippas, you send in this guy or ran him into position ahead of time. They use an all-out attack to try and hit as often as they can to get +1 to wound. That's not bad. So you can have Gutrippers hitting on 3s, wounding on 2s, crit mortaling potentially on 6s, maybe even crit mortaling on 5s if you do venom encrusted weapons. It kind of turns the Gutrippers into something dangerous. He's not bad. I prefer the defense. Why? We'll get to that in a second. Because I think it gels better with some of the more defensive builds. I find that the Murknob with the banner lends itself to that, whereas this guy, I guess, would lend himself to something a more aggressive Kruleboyz built army. I don't know of any of those, but if any of you have tested out something that has been very effective to you, man, I would love to hear it. I have not built anything that I've liked so far as an aggressive Kruleboyz melee army. So this guy doesn't seem to find a spot in my lists. All right, now let's get to the hot sauce. All right, this book brought many things, but one of the cool things it brought was a new points for the Gutrippers. These guys are now 150 points for 20 wounds on a 5-up save. That is awesome. Do not decrease this any more than this. At 150 is got to be the absolute rock bottom price for this unit. Anything less, I think these guys turn into a real problem. They're just decent. They're a great wounds wall, curtain wall to protect your Boltboyz. They can kick out occasionally some crazy amount of damage in the form of mortal wounds from the crit 6 off their spears. They're really good. And actually their other ability, which is called Scare Tactics, you roll a die and on a 3+, subtract 1 from hit rolls from non-hero units that target them, is actually super good. And this is a bit of improvement. It used to not affect monsters previously. It now will affect monsters. The only condition now is heroes aren't scared by little shields. But everything else in the game potentially can be. And that has been super clutch. Again, it's another layer of add-on of control and miring down your opponent's ability to play the game and potentially complete battle tactics. Because a lot of those battle tactics, or at least some of those battle tactics, might be conditional on deleting a unit. And if you're suffering a -1 to hit, -1 attack because of spells, -1 die because of endless spells or manifestations, these are all just this aggregate really makes fighting into Kruleboyz a real pain in the butt for your opponent. And I absolutely adore Gutrippaz. Now, when the nerfs came and they took the Sludge Raker and nerfed it into the ground, I already thought the Sludge Raker was overcosted at 320 points at the time. The Sludge Raker never made it into any of my lists. I actually went into full-on Gutripper mode, and I was one of the guys that really loved 40 Gutrippers. Apparently, this is not a unique idea. Other players arrived at the same conclusion. I preferred the more reliable Gutripper bodies and what they provided than taking the Sludge Raker. That being said, the Sludge Raker was very, very cool. Anyway, Gutrippers, being a 40 Gutripper kind of guy, I love the fact that Gutrippers are 150 points. Again, they cannot be lower than this. They're already extremely solid. We're basically paying 7-ish points per wound for this unit. And that is an absolute steal. Absolutely love Gutrippers. Very easy unit to get a hold of. If you had the 3rd edition core game, you could grab all those. They're so good. All right, so next unit, Monster-killaz. Another phenomenal unit that I really, really love and plays really well into the meta, mostly because there's a lot of monsters rocking out in the meta currently right now. Let's look at their melee stats. These guys have anti-monster +1 rend and crit mortals like all Kruleboyz do. They're 3 attacks apiece. They only hit on 4s, they wound on 3s, 1 rend, but of course if they're going into monsters, 2 rend and 1 damage. At 120 points, they seem a little bit pricey until you start getting into their actual rules. Now the rules are really kind of neat. They got an ability called Bait the Trap, which is pick an enemy monster in combat with this unit to be the target. Okay, roll a die, add 1 to the roll if the target is damaged. So if it's suffered any damage from any shot, spells, or what have you, you get a +1 to this die roll. On a 3+, the target has strike last. That is awesome. Just absolutely fantastic. Yet another potential source of strike last against a unit that is fairly common in the meta, that being monsters. The other really cool thing they get to do is their reaction. That's right. So any monster, that tries to perform a rampage within 6 inches of this unit has that rampage negated on a die roll of 2+. Now, if you roll a 1, you lose this token, this very, very cute little goblin token with a whole bunch of spikes clutching an egg. You lose that token. This ability is hinging on whether you have that token attached to that unit. So if you roll a 1, you lose the token, you lose this ability for the rest of the game. But while you have it on a 2+, you get to negate rampages, which is a really big deal. There's a lot of really great rampages out in the game. I certainly couldn't go through them all right now. But at 120 points, Monster-killaz unit probably makes almost every single one of my lists, sometimes 2. I do not take much more than that because Gutrippers are just way too good. And I think now, what are they at 300 points for 40 wounds? I freaking love Gutrippers, but I really do like this unit quite a bit. Sometimes I use this unit to position it for battle tactic to try and take the flank. But if I'm facing off against an army that has monsters, I'll layer it. I'll put my Gutrippers in front and then nest this unit here so that it spreads that 6-inch aura to deny rampages. And some of these rampages are huge, like repositioning rampages, like in the form of like Bolthanos, preventing that guy from grasshoppering across your lines is absolutely massive. Just an example. So yeah, Monster-killaz, really like them. All right, now we get to the true meat and potatoes of the Kruleboyz. Well, that's not true, actually. Gutrippaz were the meat and potatoes. This is the real hammer of the army, and it comes in the form of Man-skewer Boltboyz. Now, Man-skewer Boltboyz don't have any combat to really speak of. Let's get straight into their range attacks. And they have two profiles. They have one at 18 inches, which is one attacks 3s and 3s, Rend 2, 2 flat damage. Now, unfortunately, this is a unit of 3 models, so when it becomes reinforced, it's only a max size unit of 6. So you're not firing huge amounts of shots, but I don't know about you guys who have been experimenting. I've been taking 18 of these and basically sheltering them in under the umbrella of 40 Gutrippaz. This is probably one of the better units in the army, and you just can't. Obviously, range is a big deal. The ability to be able to reach out, do damage to opponent without much crackback is exactly what you want, and this is an army that wants it. You're going to do lots of damage. Potentially, if you focus all 18 Boltboyz into one target, you could probably delete it. Is it cost effective? Probably not, but you're trying to buy your army time, or buy your army or your Boltboyz time to be able to just blast away for as long as possible. And if you do that, these guys kneecap really well. Now, they have a couple abilities. In the shooting phase, they have Pick 'em Off. If this unit has not used the move ability, it can get an add 1 to hit. So let's go back to the range stat. So that one 18-inch attack can actually be hitting on 2s, wounding on 3s. And then it can also do a 12-inch attack, firing double the amount of shots. So if it doesn't move, it can fire 2 shots, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, but then the Rend drops by 1. But still, the damage is 2 apiece. Pretty darn good if they don't move. If they're on the move, that's okay. You can just fire your single shots. You don't get the benefit of +1 to hit, but obviously if you're moving, it's probably because it's worthwhile to do so. The other passive effect they have is each time this unit uses a shoot ability, it's either pick the hasty or the aim shot. It's the two profiles that I just went through. So my list, I've been rocking 18 Boltboyz with 40 Gutrippaz. These are pretty much the basics. That list has been testing pretty well. I know there's a lot of negativity over Kruleboyz currently right now because of the shenanigans we've lost. But honestly, there is something there. And maybe one of you wonderful wizards out there in the universe can even leverage this even more in ways that I haven't even thought of. But Boltboyz are absolutely fantastic. They've done surprising amounts of damage. I've surprised many opponents with them. And there you go. Highly recommend Boltboyz, one of the best units that Kruleboyz have. Speaking of a great unit, we get into the Beast-skewer Killbow, and this is just a war machine that plays pretty well into the meta, for lack of a better term. I believe these are roughly about 170 points. They're 24-inch range shots. Fire 2 of them, hit on 4s, wound on 2s, wonderfully 2 Rend with D6 damage. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is the Boltboyz and the Beast-skewer Killbow have crit auto wound. So on 6s, they auto wound. So that's pretty cool. The Killbow has the wonderful ability, and here's where it gets really neat. If it stands still, it gets the +1 to hit, much like the Boltboyz. But the other big deal is skewering bolts. Now the skewering bolts ability is the damage characteristic of this unit's Beast-skewer bolts is 6 when they wound a monster. Again, monsters are very, very common in the meta. So doing a flat 6 damage on a Killbow that when standing still is hitting on 3s, wounding on 2s at Ren 2. Wow. You get 2 Killbows firing at a monster. If you hit and they all go through, that is 24 damage. Even just 1 Killbow. If he hits both times, wounds both times, and both squirrel through, that's 12 damage to a monster. Really, really good. I do recommend trying to slide 1 into the list. You will be pressed for points, especially if you do the thing that I was suggesting, which is 40 Gutrippaz and the 18 Boltboyz. Kind of hard to squeeze that in, but maybe you drop a Boltboy unit to put the actual Beast-skewer Killbows in instead. Completely valid option. Depends on your meta, I guess. All right, so now let's get into the things I'm most disappointed in. And we're going to dive in a little deep into the Snatchaboss, simply because we need to discuss, because he got a huge change in this book. He went from something that was very, very dear to the community in amping up the amount of damage that Gutrippaz do in combat to a weak sauce monster that I still struggle to pick as in a list. So let's go over it. He does have a combat profile that is okay. What's really neat is he's one of the few orcs that hit on 3s. And that is something. That is not nothing. All out attacks, all these profiles hit on 2s. And that is pretty darn decent. So the grappling hook, having crit mortals like all Kruleboyz do. So he could be on an all-out attack, 3 attacks, hitting on 2s, winning on 3s, with the unfortunate 1 Ren, but 3 flat damage. Not bad. Sludge Raker Talons, again, 6 attacks, all-out attack, hitting on 3s, winning on 2s, 1 Rend, 2 flat damage, not bad. And then the Sludge Raker Bite, which is really tragic at only 1 attack, hitting on 3s, wounding on 2s, but potentially hitting on 2s, wounding on 2s. 1 Rend, but a whopping D3 +3, so minimum 4 damage off of that. This guy could be your prize beast. I myself prefer the Mire Beast. This guy's clocking in at, I believe, 220 points. Let's see where it's at. I'm curious. Am I misremembering that? Battle profiles. Let's look at heroes. Breaka-boss. Breaka-boss is at 220. And the Snatchaboss is at 240. So for 20 points more, you get 4 more wounds, more movement, but I don't think as good a combat profile. I don't think it leverages the prize beast, the extra +1. The fact that you could have the Mirebrute at bare minimum 6 attacks that could potentially hit on 3s as a prize beast, wounding on 2s, 2 Rend, 3 flat damage is so, so cool. And he's a bit cheaper. And I don't need the mobility of the Sludge Raker or the Snatchaboss to play into the playstyle I'm doing, right? I'm building up my castle of Gutrippaz. I have my firing point with the form of Boltboyz. My enemy's gonna come toward me. If he doesn't, I'm just gonna keep on shooting until he's dead, until he stops twitching. So this guy, I just haven't found a use for him. If you have lists that you've gotten a bit more success, please comment below. Love to hear about it. His adjustment to his ability is the Festering Wounds. This is a once per turn army, end of any turn. It says Festering Wounds declare pick up the 3 enemy units that had any damage points allocated to them by combat attacks made by this unit or a friendly unit with the Sludge Raker Venom keyword to be the targets. And you're like, enemy? You mean friendly units with a Sludge Raker keyword? Yeah, you can get it by being close to them. We'll cover that in a second. Roll a d3, and for each 2+, so this is the bad d3, inflict an amount of mortal damage on that target equal to the roll, and subtract 1 from wound rolls for that target's attacks until the end of the next turn. So not bad. Like, he's not bad. It's not extra damage, but he is substantially cheaper. He was 320 or 340 before. Now he's at least roughly 100 points cheaper than he was before. Is it enough to save him? Again, not had a lot of experience. His War Scroll does not necessarily inspire me to take him. So not something that I've experimented deeply with. If you have something different, I would love to hear about it. His other ability is in your hero phase. Pick a friendly Kruleboyz unit wholly within 12 inches of this unit, and that unit gets the Sludge Raker Venom keyword. And that, of course, would unlock the other ability. So, okay, not my fave, but if you think he's great, love to hear about it. This leads into, hopefully we'll now speed up a little bit, the Swampboss Scumdreck. Basically the same as the Sludge Raker, with the extra little bit of funness with him being a bet master and a counting crew. We're not going to dive deep into this guy at all. If you think is great, man, I would love to hear about it, whether you can leverage these abilities. I didn't really like the Sludge Raker. I don't really like this guy. Both are extremely cool models. Just really hope they get better over time. But if you think he's great, again, love to hear about it. And then we go into one of the worst War Scrolls probably ever written, which is the Hobgrot Slittaboss. I actually don't understand why this guy actually exists. If there was ever something that was like, can symbolize how much care was put into this book, it would be the Hobgrot Slittaboss. Oh my God, this guy's so bad. 4 attacks, a hit on 4s, wound on 4s, 1 Ren, D3 damage. So, almost nothing. You hit on 2s. So, with 4 attacks, you'll hit twice on average. With those 2 attacks, you'll wound once, maybe, and then with 1 rend. He's got an ability called Company Tactics. I don't think we have even a slide for this. Pick a friendly Hobgrot Slitta's unit. That's right, buddy. Pick that Slitta's unit. That has not used the fight ability this turn and is within this unit's combat range to be the target. Okay, cool. The target can be picked to use a fight ability immediately after the fight ability used by this unit has been resolved. If it is picked to do so, add 1 to the wound rolls of those Hobgrots. Freaking terrible. So this guy has to charge. The other unit has to charge to make a charge. Be within combat range of each other. And then, woo! The Hobgrots now get to swing at +1 to wound. Ugh. All right. One of the things people have said is like, oh, I know where he's good. He could be a guy you could put in the tower. All right, let's go back to the beginning of this whole entire presentation. No need to bring up the slide, Gaio. That tower increases its aura effect from 12 to 18 inches, okay, if there's a hero in it. All right, this could be the hero in it. Why? This guy's useless as useless things. trying to watch my language. So why not take this 80-point model and stick him in the hero to increase the range of the aura? Problem. He's one of those swamp bosses. Yeah, that's right. So if you take your, say, Mirebrute, and you want the field marshal ability, are you going to pick this guy? Because that's what you would have to do. You'd have to pick him instead of the Murknob with Banna, instead of Killaboss. That's right. This guy, instead of. To do field marshal, by the way, you would want to be amongst the troops. Is this guy you're picking? No? Okay. So then what is he going to do? Lead a regiment? Because he's a hero. He can't be nested in anything else. So are you going to put him under Kragnos or put him under Gobsprakk? Heck no. And you are going to definitely take Swampcalla Shamans, and guess what Swampcalla Shamans cannot do is have any hero nested underneath them. I actually dig the model. I know people weren't super enthusiastic about the actual Hobgrot Slitaboss. So from a design perspective, the miniature design team, you guys are awesome. And never think when anyone in the world is criticizing the unit that it's because you guys suck. No, you guys are amazing. What sucks is the person that wrote this. This is just absolutely terrible. I cannot think of a single use, not even to put in a tower, because the opportunity cost would be instead of taking another hero. There is absolutely no use for this War Scroll. Absolutely terrible. I'm sorry I spent time talking about it, but there it is. We go into the Marshcrawler Sloggoth, Dobby. This guy is just okay. He's disappointing all over. He kind of hits things in combat with his Sloggoth's claws, 6 attacks, hitting on 4s, of course, because he's a monster, and because he's a monster, wounding on 2s, 1 rend, 2 damage. He's not bad. He can regenerate as well every hero phase, D3. His big deal is on the march, where he can allow Kruleboyz to run in charge. Cool, but again, we don't really have hammers in the form of units, because these Kruleboy units that can run in charge, by the way, are infantry units. So this guy does not help Kragnos, not that he needs it, with a 3d6 charge. But could you imagine if he could run in 3d6 charge? That would be pretty funny, but he can't do that. I wish this was just redesigned. The additional charge, now that all armies really can't ally with each other, the additional charge, and now that it's keyworded to boot, this guy's ability is garbage. I would much rather have his drum ability to just be anything else that synergizes with the army. Just have something that actually helps with the design of what you're going for. Like, for instance, maybe within the drum, all these rolls that you have to do, 3+ to do this effect, or a 4+ to do that effect. If he actually just added +1 to all those die rolls, it would make them absolutely fantastic. And you're like going, yeah, of course it would make them absolutely fantastic. That's ridiculous. And I'm like, is it ridiculous that I could get a strike last ability, for instance, not strike last, but a -1 to hit from Scare Tactics on a 2+, when there's units in the game that just do -1 to hit always guaranteed? Would that be so crazy? I don't think so. It would be neat if he was some sort of buff totem, but he isn't. And his, well, it was 1 buff, which is run in charge, is kind of mediocre in the army. And then we get into the last War Scroll we're going to talk about, which is the Hobgrot Slitas. And these guys are terrible. I don't know why you would take them. They are 90 points. 90 points of stuff that doesn't do anything. They occupy space on the board. I would much rather have these at probably 60 points. If these guys were 60 points, I'd consider taking them because they do absolutely nothing. Like, it's nothing appreciable in the game. At 60 points, I could see them, I could kind of try and set up for flanks or something, or screens. They do not hang around on the table. They do absolutely nothing on the table, but you could grab one of the worst war scrolls in the game and make these guys slightly better. Yay. All right, so Hobgrot Slitas, not something I would ever take in the army. So overall, we're in a bit of a rough spot for Kruleboyz, I know, but there are some gems. The Boltboyz, the Gutrippaz, the Mirebrute are genuine gems. The Shamans are really good. Gobsprakk, if you don't mind dropping 330 points on him, a 2-cast wizard, 2-cast durable-ish wizard, as long as he doesn't get into combat, it's not bad. Especially a wizard that could punish other wizards, that could just do chip damage throughout the game as he tries to unbind them. That is actually not bad. I like the fact that he's a War Master, so you could unlock Prize Beast in the form of the Mirebrute. So I think there's play, guys. I think there's a way for you to grab your Kruleboyz and bust out. Now, we're going to get to my absolute favorite sub-formation, which is middle finger. If you haven't guessed, that's what the thumbnail is all about. And middle finger, why is it one of my favorites? All my lists have been in and around middle finger. It's because of the amount of Boltboyz I've been taking. Adding an extra 3 inches to their shots so that these units can take advantage of their +1 to hit for not moving is just absolutely fantastic. It's been my default, and I've been having some success with it. Are Kruleboyz in a bit of a rough spot? Yeah, they are. But honestly, I think between the endless spells and that tower that you can make an automatic dirty trick pop off is actually pretty cool. And the army still looks great. And I don't honestly think the army is terrible. Actually, maybe even flirts with pretty good. Is it going to be amazing? I have to play test it a heck of a lot more, but I have been having some success. So playing, for instance, into Slaves of Darkness, where they're super aggressive, come at you, popping the Mork's Pebble, potentially getting that -1 to hit, and then the next, on my turn, if they took first turn, popping off some spells, disrupting them, and then just firing the absolute bejesus out of them with my Boltboyz is not bad. It's genuinely not bad. I think you'd be surprised on it. So what's the downside of all that? Is I think there's really only one build. It's just a pile of Boltboyz, a pile of Gutrippaz, and then your seasoning of choice between what heroes you take. It is really limiting, not very inspirational. But I mean, if this army is like one of your main armies, at least you have a way to continue to play this game. So there it is. I'm gonna leave on that high point. So middle finger, absolute best choice, I think. All right, so what do you guys think? Are you feeling Kruleboyz these days? Have you actually busted them out? Have you tried out some of the tricks? Have you found out anything I haven't talked about? I would love to hear about it. Please comment on it below. But with that, this video has been long enough. Thank you very much for joining us. I want to thank my buddy Gaio for helping me out today. And with that, guys, see you next week.